Has the trade market for elite defensemen truly dried up to the point where Dougie Hamilton is literally the only viable option left for Brad Treliving? Or is James Myrtle overstating the desperation and missing other potential defensive acquisitions that could address Toronto's crisis without requiring massive salary retention? Let me set the stage for what's become an absolutely critical moment in the Toronto Maple Leaf season. It's Tuesday, January 20th, 2026, and the countdown to the Olympic trade freeze on February 4th has officially begun. According to James Myrtle's report from The Athletic, Brad Treliving is essentially cornered. The market for elite defensemen has completely dried up, with Rasmus Andersson going to Vegas and Quinn Hughes already in Minnesota. Only one name remains capable of moving the needle: Dougie Hamilton. But here's the brutal reality. To bring the $9 million defenseman to Toronto, the Leafs have to win a financial battle against the Devils and the salary cap itself. Chris Tanev's injury has fundamentally altered the entire equation. His status for the remainder of the season remains uncertain after suffering a third serious injury to the groin. Without Tanev, the defense loses its foundational pillar of stability. Morgan Riley's partner is now Brandon Carlo. Yes, the former Bruin is apparently a Maple Leaf in this timeline, but the depth has essentially evaporated. Hamilton isn't Tanev. He's not going to block shots with his face or sacrifice his body the way Tanev does. But he brings exactly what this team desperately needs right now: top four talent that moves the puck and commands the power play. Now, let's talk about the mathematical reality of this situation. Hamilton makes $9 million annually. My understanding is that the Leafs will want a high level of retention, potentially even 50%. If the Devils retain 50% of the salary, Hamilton's cap hit drops to $4.5 million. That becomes viable for Toronto. That's the number that makes this deal actually work within the salary cap constraints. But here's where Myrtle raises a crucial warning. Other teams will be willing to absorb much more and potentially everything of the contract. If Utah or Detroit enter the bidding with significant cap space, if they're willing to absorb the full $9 million, then Toronto loses this auction. The only way the Leafs win is if Hamilton uses his no-trade clause to force a trade to Toronto, essentially choose and come home, rather than go to a team with more cap space. That's the critical variable in this entire equation. Does Dougie Hamilton want to come to Toronto badly enough to reject other offers? Does he want to reunite with Craig Berube? Does he want to play for a championship contender? Those are the questions that will ultimately determine whether this deal actually happens. Now, let's talk about the roster that Myrtle has revealed. This is a completely different team than what most people have been imagining. The Leafs have apparently constructed a roster that's flying right now, averaging 3.8 goals per game. On the offensive side, you have Auston Matthews, Matias Maxelli, the elite Finnish playmaker, Nicholas Roy, the defensive center who came from Vegas, Scott Laughton, the veteran leader from Philadelphia, Easton Cowan, and Max Domi. That's a completely different forward group than what people have been discussing. On the defensive side, you have Riley paired with Brandon Carlo, Jake McCabe paired with Oliver Ekman-Larsson, and then Benoit and Stecker rounding out the depth. It's a team that's been constructed to be deeper and more physically imposing, the kind of team that's boring to play against in the playoffs. Adding Dougie Hamilton to this group will be the final touch of pure talent. You'd have an elite offensive defenseman who can quarterback the power play, create scoring chances from the back end, and provide the kind of top four stability that this team desperately needs. But here's the risk calculation that Treliving has to make. Hamilton is 33 years old and has a history of injuries. He's not a long-term solution. He's a short-term rental that could help the Leafs compete for a championship in the next 2 or 3 years. Even with $7 million or $8 million, Hamilton has significant value for Toronto. That's the key insight. Even with substantial salary retention, even with the financial complexity, Hamilton still represents real value for a team that's trying to win now. The timeline is also absolutely crucial. If Tanev goes on long-term injured reserve, which seems increasingly likely given his injury history, then the salary cap space magically opens up. The Leafs could potentially fit Hamilton within their available space without having to make additional moves. That's the scenario that makes this deal work most cleanly. Here's what I think is actually happening. Brad Treliving is in active negotiations with the Devils right now. He's trying to convince them to retain 40 to 50% of Hamilton's salary. He's probably also exploring whether Hamilton would be willing to waive his no-trade clause for Toronto. If both of those things happen, if the Devils agree to the retention and Hamilton agrees to come to Toronto, then this deal gets done before the Olympic break. The question for Brad Treliving is whether he's willing to commit to this move. Is he willing to bet that Hamilton can stay healthy and contribute at a high level? Is he willing to accept the risk that comes with acquiring an aging defenseman with an injury history? Or should he continue exploring other options and hope that another defensive option emerges before the deadline? So here's the question for Leafs Nation. Should Brad Treliving pursue Dougie Hamilton aggressively and accept whatever salary retention the Devils demand? Or should he wait and see if other defensive options emerge? Is Hamilton truly the only viable option left on the market? Or is Myrtle overstating the desperation? Would you support this acquisition if it meant accepting significant salary retention and committing long-term cap dollars to a 33-year-old defenseman? Drop your thoughts in the comments and hit that like button if you want more coverage of this potential acquisition and the strategic direction of the franchise. Because right now, the Maple Leafs are facing a critical decision point, and the next 2 weeks before the Olympic break will determine whether this team makes a championship push or settles for another disappointing season. The market is closing, the options are limited, and Dougie Hamilton might be the last chance to address the defensive crisis.